free the land in the spirit of our great hero and who descendants named after Shogwe Lumumba. Let's say, free the land. Free the land. Okay, in the spirit of the movement and the spirit of the movement as I evolve from, I will say to you, all power to the people. This is, let me hear you say that, all power to the people. Okay, and I say that.
The more things change, the more they remain the same. A second example, when I was growing up, I couldn't understand why it was that we who worked the fields every day, 12 hours, why we were not covered by Social Security and why minimum wage did not apply to us. As that closed down when I came to Jackson State, the closing down part, as the farm became mechanized, folks were no longer going to the fields every day. Only then did the law begin to reach out and talk about Social Security and minimum wages for all the other citizens. But the whole while I worked, and there was no such animal as Social Security for me, even though the plantation owner was receiving government subsidies for his particular farm. The third example I just wanted to give was to talk about the fact when we worked in the cotton fields in the Mississippi Delta, it was not strange for us to look up, periodically and see a crop duster coming over spraying the field with insecticides. And of course we covered our heads and stuff. As they did that, they were poisoning us as well as the crops. Well, I think we see some similar things to that happening every day for folks who live near these pipelines and nuclear plants and all the other hazardous kind of things that they occur. And periodically, you watch the news now, you'll hear of a train wreck, and there was hazardous material, and they are trying to cover that over. All of this, just to me, is reminiscent of what has occurred before, maybe under a slightly different set of circumstances, but they're still the same things.
Today I just want to address the plight in education that I face as a student and that many students still face today in the Mississippi Delta. According to Beacon Hill Institute's 13th annual state competitiveness report, Mississippi ranks 50th overall based on measures of human capital, with low rankings in high school and college attainment, 4th grade math proficiency, skilled labor, employment rates, and health of the population. I grew up in the Mississippi Delta, one of the poorest regions in the United States, whose population is largely African American. I'm a product of the Indianola Public School District, which is located in Sunflower County. Almost 36% of Sunflower County's population lives below the poverty line. The Delta continues to face the adult literacy crisis, child poverty, low-performing schools, underfunding of its schools, and the list goes on. I would describe my educational experience as very subpar. Although I was an honor student and considered academically smart, I was so socially ignorant to a lot of things that we endured as children and young adults. Even as a child in elementary school, I would often question certain things in my mind, but I never verbally expressed them because, like many other black children and other children of color, we were conditioned to believe that our circumstances and mistreatment were normal. They were inevitable and were supposed to happen to us. We were supposed to be punished severely because we were bad. We were supposed to be perceived as dumb and given curriculum that suits our lack of intelligence. Because we were poor and we were children of color, it was our own fault, our parents' fault, and every adult in our community's fault that we got the dilapidated school buildings, the worn-out textbooks, and the school lunches that were mirror images of the average prison meal. One concept that I deeply regret I had no understanding of early on is the school-to-prison pipeline. Although I was a student who'd never been suspended, expelled, or even sent to the principal's office, that did not make me immune to the criminalization process. As a young black woman, I've been aggressively ordered to line up against the wall, ordered to lie on the floor, frisked, searched, and sniffed by police dogs numerous times. In my 22 years of life, all of those instances happened to me under the age of 17. My first account of this was my first year of middle school. I was only 11 years old and in the 6th grade. These routine searches became the norm and happened at least twice a year all the way through my senior year of high school. I even remember my 1st grade class taking a field trip to the county jail, and they allowed us to step inside the cells. only 6 years old. Being exposed to such an environment. It didn't matter how good our grades were, how good our attendance was, or how good our behavior was. All of us had to experience this. Mind you, our student body was roughly 98% African American. At the time, I was so desensitized to what was happening to us that I didn't realize the message they were sending to us. They were shaping all of us to become the criminals we were expected to be. Unfortunately, majority of us complied without question or complaint because early on, we've been conditioned to believe that this was the standard. Years later, after attending a lecture about human and civil rights, I learned that our parents could have taken legal action because what they were doing to us was unlawful. Another contributor to the school-to-prison pipeline in the Mississippi Delta is our extremely poor learning environment.
I want to talk to you briefly about Initiative 42. In 1997, our state legislators adopted an equitable formula to fully fund our public schools. Unfortunately, 19 years later, they have only fully funded that formula twice. And so when you talk about the underfunding of education in the state of Mississippi year after year, typically it's about $300 million a year. Specifically looking at Jackson Public Schools, in the last 6 years alone, they have been underfunded by $98.6 million. When we talk about the number of $98.6 million, this could have paid for 287 school teachers to have a 10-year career in the district, and 268 school counselors could have had a 10-year career in the district. 328,000 computers could have been bought. 1,039 school buses, and one issue that's really important in Jackson Public Schools is textbooks. That $98.6 million could have paid for 986,000 textbooks. Unfortunately, since our state legislators year after year have decided to underfund education, there have been many groups in the state who have gone down, lobbied, and advocate, and they would come back with underfunding.
I'm the proud parent of a youth that was attacked, critically injured, and then hidden in the system to keep the incident quiet. Imagine this. On a normal visitation day, I was told by the Walnut Grove staff that my son, who had been there for 3 months, was no longer at the facility. Walnut Grove was a private youth correctional facility operated by the GEO Group at the time for the Mississippi Department of Corrections. When I reached out for more information of where my son was, they consistently denied knowledge of his whereabouts. How could a child placed in the custody of the Mississippi Department of Corrections disappear? After not getting any assistance from the Walnut Grove staff, I was referred to the warden, who refused to tell me about my son's whereabouts, and he directed me to the Mississippi Department of Corrections. After 2.5 weeks of MDOC and Walnut Grove passing the buck back and forth and playing games, I took matters into my own hands and started my own investigation. I realized that they did not care about the well-being of my son, nor did they care about me knowing his status. I found out that my son was in the hospital, but no other information was given. I called the Mississippi Department of Corrections and informed them that I knew of my son's whereabouts, to which I received no response. A few days later, one of the MDOC chaplains called and said he wanted to help me with visitation for my son. I accepted, and visitation was granted to me. But when I went to go see him, they had already moved him from his facility. Not having anything else to go on, weeks later, a new visitation order was granted to me for my son for a 2-hour visit, in which I was only able to spend 10 minutes of that with my son. The Friday following that week, the head doctor of the Mississippi Department of Corrections called me and told me no further visitation would be granted, and the visitation that I already had was done as a favor to me. I was forced to wait 2 months until he was granted inmate visitation right by the Mississippi Department of Corrections. My son was transferred then to the Parchment Correctional Facility, to a drug and alcohol facility within Parchment, in which he has neither a problem with either one of them. No problem whatsoever, but this is where he was placed. He was an underage inmate at Parchment, put there and left there so that this incident would not be known. He has yet to receive treatment that addresses his injury, even though many requests have been made for this treatment. My son, along with 12 others, had been assaulted in a riot at the Walnut Grove Youth Correctional Facility, initiated by a guard. in which he received brain damage amongst other injuries, but still has not received proper medical treatment for this. Many inmates' rights were violated. Even MDOC violated their own rules and guidelines to cover it up. So I'm here because a lot of things has happened, a lot of things have been covered up, but I think it needs to be exposed so it can be addressed.
I'm also the wife of Jehoiakim Mulazim, birth name Charles Daniels, whose human rights and constitutional rights have been violated and freedom taken away by the state of Mississippi and the Harrison County judicial system. My husband entered in the MDOC in 1982 when he was 23 and has been incarcerated for 34 years for attempted armed robbery, and no one was hurt nor killed nor any money taken. My husband was wrongfully convicted and his freedom taken away for 3+ decades based on no evidence at all and an eyewitness misidentification of one white lady's testimony, which did not match my husband's physical description or place of employment. Then a judge sentenced my husband to the maximum sentencing of that crime, 40 mandatory years of imprisonment, because he would not plead guilty and accept a plea deal of 5 years and racism, telling him at sentencing, "Nigger, you will never see the light of day again." Then my husband becomes a product of mass incarceration due to several important factors, such as factor number 1, excessive cruel and unusual punishment. In my husband's case, the punishment does not fit the crime and ineffective assistance of counsel. Factor number 2 of mass incarceration my husband experienced is the disparity of sentencing of disproportionate ratio of the number of black offenders to white offenders as habitual offenders under Mississippi Code 99-1981, who meet the criteria and said language of the law. And the discrimination in sentencing, the amount of time a black offender is sentenced to is extremely much more versus lesser time for white offenders sentenced for the same crime. For example, my husband was sentenced for 40 mandatory years versus a white offender being sentenced for 3 mandatory years for the same crime. Factor number 3 of mass incarceration his experience is the state of Mississippi constant misuse and constitutional violation of his 14th Amendment due to the state's deliberate act of not applying its own Mississippi Code 99-1981 is written. Mississippi has not applied this law to every offender, as the language begins with, in the law, every offender who meets the criteria. Mississippi discriminates on which offender to charge under this law by applying it to offenders based on race, and they use it as a tool of torture if an offender refuses to plead guilty or accept a plea deal, and or the offender chooses to exercise their constitutional rights to a trial.
I'm a former catfish worker who worked over 20 years in Mississippi organizing. We were workers who encountered daily abuse, being harassed, long hours, forbidden bathroom access, use of forced hot water, and sexual harassment. We made a journey of resistance, which helped us to change workers' condition all over this country because as workers, we were sick and tired of being sick and tired. We as workers started to organize and fight back. We started a campaign of truth by telling our story, by telling our story, we started a campaign of truth, telling our story, how can it be after many, many years of foot soldiers in this country, like Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Fannie Lou Hamer, Medgar Evers, who had made tremendous change, but we were treated with no respect, no dignity, no voice. It was time for a change. Mary Young and I started a campaign with a union card that we received in the mail. We sent in the card and help came. We were tired of the daily abuse. In 1986, we organized a union. It was not easy. We had to gain people's trust and give them hope that things would change on a daily basis. Our first contract was a test run of how the bosses would not accept our contract. And in 1990, when the contract ended, we went out on strike. We had to show the company that we were not afraid and that we demanded change. The journey started out by going out in the world, letting other organizations know of our struggle, and boycott catfish from state to state, demanding them to take it out the freezers and stop buying it. The boycott lasted about 3 months. We won the strike, which was the largest labor strike of 90% women workers in the state of Mississippi. 1,200 workers came out. We won wage increase. It was a bathroom clause that said we didn't have but 7 times a week to use the bathroom. We eliminated that clause and other benefits. But most of all, we gained dignity and respect. We were proud, black, beautiful women who would never be the same.
That night, Jonathan Sanders was exercising his horse, and Kevin Harrington was at a store talking to another guy, which was a white guy. And Jonathan Sanders rode by, and Jonathan Sanders stated, per reports, leave him alone, leave the guy alone, and just trotted along on his horse. Kevin Harrington decided to leave the guy at the store and started following Jonathan Sanders. In the paper, they called it speculations of drugs, which is what they prepped society with to come up with this story 6 months later that Jonathan Sanders asphyxiated off of crack cocaine. In the beginning, they were saying it was manual asphyxiation, saying that the police choked Jonathan Sanders for 20 minutes. I mean, it's all in the stories if you research it. Beer Reddy even stated that it was basically a mistake. He tried to clarify that homicide wasn't murder, but I mean, if you Google it, we all know what homicide is. So 6 months later, after y'all have plotted all of this, y'all come back with mechanical asphyxiation, saying that Jonathan choked off crack cocaine. It was witnesses there that night that said Kevin Harrington choked Jonathan Sanders for over 20 minutes. But prior to him leaving the store, the white guy stated that Kevin Harrington said, I'm tired of this nigger. But the witness didn't uphold this in court. There are also rumors that people were paid off. And money is the root of all evil, but it depends on who the person is receiving the money. Some people you can't pay out for justice. It's a lot of inhumane acts that goes on in Clark County, Mississippi. As y'all know, I don't know whether y'all know or not, but Stonewall, Mississippi is named after a Confederate, if I'm not mistaken. Even with the reports and the testimonies of the witnesses on January the 11th, they did not indict Kevin Harrington. They said that the information that they received did not call for him to be indicted, and we as a society did not understand that. They had all the evidence. Keep in mind that when Jonathan Sanders was killed and went to the hospital, according to witnesses, Jonathan Sanders was dead on the scene. The coroner pulled up, nobody was there, no tape, nothing. They forced him to sit up. He couldn't sit up because they were saying that Jonathan was dead. When the police did sit Jonathan up, blood began to come from his mouth, his nose, and his neck. They are saying that the police had him in some kind of hole, Ginsu hole or something. I cannot pronounce that right. Anyway, when Jonathan's mother and family went to the hospital, they had it blocked off. She was not able to identify his body till almost 2 weeks later. They did not even know who they were crying over. They said when they rolled the body out, supposedly the body was supposed to have been in the body bag. When they rolled the body out, they said that anyone who comes near the body would go to jail. So at this point, no one really seen Jonathan. No one knows anything as far as what Jonathan looked like after he was back there in the hospital room. They brought him out in the body bag. Ms. Francis was under the impression that Jonathan Sanders was gone. Her son was gone to the medical examiner in Jackson. The medical examiner called. As a matter of fact, Clark County Police Department told her that his body was at the medical examiner in Jackson. Come to find out the next day at 11 o'clock, the body still wasn't there. The body was at a funeral home, which is for Caucasian people in Quitman, Mississippi. And if you live in Quitman, you know that if you're African American, your body goes to either Turner Funeral Home or Baring Gardner, never to Rice Funeral Home. His body remained at Rice Funeral Home to the next day. Still, she has not identified the body. 3 days before the funeral is when she seen her son, when they already had them together. They never told her anything else. They kept quiet. Nobody really ever spoke. And the most mind-boggling thing to me is the police or no one else even offered their condolences. And they used and she discussed his past, them saying that he was a drug dealer, but regardless of that, no one deserves to be killed, whether it's by police or whoever else. If you just exercising the horse, am I going over the speed limit? If I see you sitting there, am I speculating that you're dealing drugs just sitting there because you're riding your horse? Am I speculating you? No one else was there for for a transaction to happen for them to speculate that Jonathan was selling drugs. So 6 months later, they came up with this story that he had the right to stop Jonathan. He had the right to speculate drugs, and none of it is adding up. And just to add this to that, I lost my father when I was 5 years old. My father got shot and ran over. He had tire tracks in his face. My grandmother had to identify his body either way. And like I told Miss Francis, they said that you probably wouldn't want to see him. I said, that's unethical, and I believe that it's illegal that she did not get to identify her son's body, because even with tire tracks on my dad's face, his mom had to identify his body like that. Having to identify your son 2 weeks later is just unjust. And if we don't stand for something, we'll fall for anything. Thank you.